Ladies and gentlemen, we are back with another episode of Pr0totype. I am Pr0totype, and on this 53rd episode, we are finally past the, once per week makes a year kind of vibe, although obviously it's been longer than that since the show has been running. But we're getting into that groove of doing once per week, and here we are. Actually, a little bit halfway through the third week of April, but I wanted to talk about the progress made in the second week. And for that, obviously, of late, I've been writing weekly progress reports on the ModDB page. Eventually, those will be articles on our own website, of course. But until we can distribute those via the fraud launcher, it's probably not that big of a deal. And ModDB does have some nice tools to automatically format a lot of things, even though I'm sure some people would prefer to read it in a different UI. But it's here for now. It works fine for now. And what is the progress all about? It's about Cosmonarchy, the most ambitious Starcraft project ever made, and certainly the one with the most interesting, I would say, developments most recently. Just based on the fact that we've got all of these active players, some of these new guys that have discovered us recently through, say, Dead Infested's chat command in Artosis's Twitch stream, or videos on YouTube that are daily uploaded every single time. We have a match cast every morning. And it's pretty cool stuff all in all. I'm happy to be able to bring that stuff to the masses and spread the word about the project. It's a very cool project. And really, even though it's made within the bones of Brood War is really just a dependency for it. You can kind of think of it as the engine that we started with to make a completely different game. Obviously, it's not super different from a perspective of like we can't sell it. That's not how it works. But if we can at the very least open up a donations page, which we do. It's actually the coffee link that I will temporarily make visible on the bottom left of this screen so you can see what's going on. There's also a link in the description if you want to go there. And yeah, you can send us money if you like. But as far as the actual game is concerned, yeah, it is definitely a different game. It might still have Terran, Zerg, and Protoss, but they're a little bit different than what you might have expected them to be. So check them out, of course. You can always see the website and the latest downloader linked in the description of all of these episodes, as well as a link to the Cosmonarch's Compass, which is sort of like this weekly devlog that I write out and add GIFs and videos and images and stuff for people to check out. All right, with all that out of the way, I think we can enter into the first proper discussion point here. Obviously, there's a lot to cover recently since we had some competitive stuff with the Acropolis #1 tournament, the first tournament of year 2 of Cosmonarchy's competitive cycle. That is not just like an invite-only tournament, but the first proper premier 1v1 tournament where we have a qualifier stage and then a Battlements stage, a group stage, right, and then a playoff stage, which is now called the Throne Room stage. All that stuff is underway, and we have already blown past Battlements, if you can believe it. So we're going to talk about that. We're also going to be talking about the audiovisual progress. Of course, I've got a little screenshot here on the screen right now that's of the changes in question regarding things like the cleric revision, visually, the overlays that I have done and processed here for the Gorgon passive and the Autocrat passive, and the Zerg births, stuff like that, right? And then after that, we're going to be talking about balance, some ideas that I have for balance, game balance, matchups and such, as well as, of course, plans for Zerg tutorial, which is ongoing, and some campaign content that I want to work on following that tutorial's completion, give it a little bit more concrete plans for what all we're going to be doing. And, of course, the last portion of the show is always coffee questions. That means that if you go to that fancy link in the bottom left and you donate to us on a regular basis, you get access to the donator channels. And in those channels is a thread for every episode of this show where people can ask questions. So we actually have 5 questions posted. Sometimes while I'm recording them, I let people know, hey, I'm recording. You got 90 minutes to send me a question if you haven't asked one already. So maybe by the end of it, we'll have more than that. But today we've got 5. So that is that. Let's jump into that very first topic, which is going to be about the competitive focus. I do want to talk about the Gauntlets because the second Gauntlet, Gauntlet B, did conclude. That finished off the qualification phase of Acropolis #1. Neblime, who joined me for the cast of of 3 out of 4 groups of the Battlements, did talk about how the Battlements really feel like the major tournament, the main tournament, the start of the tournament, even though, from a technical standpoint, the qualifiers are kind of like a phase of the tournament. It really gets into gear with the Battlements, and it really gets into gear once the group draw is done and we know all of the players. So I think that's really cool. Obviously, it's something where, for my money, Like I really like the idea of doing more involved community stuff like that. Like I actually, I watched the group draw ceremony for ASL and stuff like that, and I think it's great to think about the idea of like, okay, you have qualifiers that are, I mean, the ASL qualifiers are fairly robust. You've got two different pairs of them, and it's just like a repeated bracket or whatever. So it's pretty robust in terms of that. It's actually more robust than the first phase of the tournament, which is best of ones. The qualifiers are all best of three, so that's obviously a lot better. I think maybe we do a little bit of a leg up on that because we are double elimination and we have two separate gauntlets, but we have less players overall trying to make it in, right? And we also have best of fives for qualifications, which you can argue whether or not that's that important or whatever. Our format is completely different overall than ASL, but it's worth pointing out that we have all of this stuff going on for the qualifier phase. I think it would be great if you qualify people in and then you actually have a group draw, right? Where you have the four people who accept invites from the previous tournament, say like the top. Basically, the way that I think it's going to work out from now on is we are just going to limit it to four, which doesn't necessarily mean the top four from each event will return for the next one, because maybe for Acropolis number 2, somebody who placed in the top 4 can't actually make it to the event, and so then the invite would be passed down to somebody who played in the top 5, or maybe we'd have like a consolidation final. I know ASL does that too, where we would say, because 5th to 6th is not actually tie broken by default, and so we're not going to add a tiebreaker for that eventuality. Instead, we'll just say, hey, you guys were 5th to 6th, you play a best of 5 to figure out who makes it in, right? And that's kind of like a cool little thing there to see who gets that orphaned invite. But anyway, the top 4 or the people, the 4 invites from the previous tournament would be leaders of their own group, and we would ask them like, hey, now it's your turn to pick from the available candidates. And some, obviously it's different for ASL than it is for us, because for us scheduling is king. Who can make it to what days, when are the groups actually going to be held, all that stuff, and we want to make it so that the groups can be held back to back. So we don't want there to be like a 3-hour long gap in between, one group starting or one group finishing and another group starting or whatever for the day on the stream, for a variety of reasons. But one of them is obviously for sure, like, do we have enough, attention grabbing content? But I don't know. There's stuff like that. There's considerations like that. By the way, the alternative would be if we decided to keep the top 6 invited in, and instead we had 6 groups. That could absolutely happen. So we'll see. We'll see how big the player base gets for Acropolis number 2. We're going to have a different term for the team tournaments, but as we continue to improve network stability with like the desyncs and stuff, and as we continue to add more, make more balance adjustments and make more content like maps and stuff for that sort of thing, eventually we'll get up to that pool of maps where we'll actually have like an Empire class map pool for the 2v2s, and we could definitely do a 2v2 tournament later this year. I think that would be really sick, but that'll be separate from Acropolis number 2. So anyway, I'm always thinking about like, I try to always basically do what's called postmortems when it comes to like these sorts of events. But sometimes I'll run them in my head, like for each phase. So like the postmortem and the Gauntlets phase, for example, is something that we can talk a little bit about here. And I mean, technically we could do postmortem on Battlements as well, because it's already done. But we can talk about the Battlements themselves, since I hadn't yet talked about them. But aside from, hey, I'm excited that they're coming up on the previous episodes. So the Gauntlet phase, which is qualifying players into that Battlements phase, which you can just call group phase if you're not up to snuff with all of our fancy names. The Gauntlet is all about like, who's going to make it in. It's a bit of a bloodbath. There's lots of players. There's players who tried in both Gauntlets and didn't make it through. There's players who tried in both Gauntlets and only made it through the second time. Of course, there's players who only had to try in the first Gauntlet and they made it through. And there's players who only had one chance, like TopRamen, and he did make it through at the end of the day. So that was really cool. And I do then have to say, like, my heart goes out to people like Benno and Moonhunter who tried in both Gauntlets. And in the case of Benno and Moonhunter, they got to the best of 5 qualification pot. That sucks for them to get to the last hurdle on the last qualifier and then not be able to make it over. But you guys will see those cast in series later on. In fact, if I play my cards right, the day that this goes live for the average people, because again, if you donate to us, you also get the perk of the episodes coming out a day early for you. The day that this goes live will be the day that the first of the qualifying series that we haven't yet done, the Beaver 99 versus Benno and Top Ramen versus Moonhunter. Those series, one of those will be live at the same time, and the other one will come out the day later. So definitely stay tuned for those because those are always bangers. Even though we know the outcome, it's still cool to see how it happened, right? So yeah, and that'll conclude the Gauntlet coverage as well. And the Battlements are already done. We already did the casts for those. And the Throne Room stage has already started as well. 2 out of 4 quarterfinals have been played, and I have the replays for. I'll at some point probably get the players to double check, one of the players who are involved in those to double check to make sure that the replays do work, because otherwise we might have some confusion when it comes to the cast. But anyway, it's pretty sick. It's pretty cool. Love to see it. And what else do we have here anyway? Obviously, with the Gauntlets done, the final names to make it out of Gauntlet B were Taco Cake and General Anakin in the upper bracket, and then the lower bracket was the Beaver 99 and Top Ramen. And then that finished up our list of our roster of players. Battlements now providing, again, 12 players total. That is 3 players per group for 4 groups. And then we had, Group A through D. Group A was Hamster, Newt, and 3Crow, which actually had a little bit of a rematch between 3Crow and Newt, which that was one of the very first upper qualification series back in Gauntlet A was those 2 guys. And it was pretty dominant in favor of Newt. So it was a little bit awkward for, I felt a little bit bad for 3Crow that he has to go straight back into that based on availabilities. But all in all, it was still an entertaining set. I'd say 3Crow definitely improved his macro, and he stood a real chance in both the games against Hamster in the Mirror, which was very surprising to me, and also in the rematch against Newt. There was I think there was one game where maybe he was a little bit less, effective or whatever. But most of the games, I'm thinking the game on Fata Morgana was one where he kind of didn't make the rush happen and then slowly bled out, and it was kind of an inevitable outcome, it felt like. But everything else was and with the rush, it was obviously scary, but everything else, all the other games he played, I thought were a pretty big improvement over what I had seen as his baseline hitherto. So when we factor that into our experimentation, our thought process, it's like, oh man, even the old dogs got some new tricks in them, and they are trying to practice up and improve. And I mean, with some deliberate coaching and some, I think a lot of the theory, 3Crow has, probably fine. But it's a question of, can he balance the micro necessary to pick off certain targets with the macro mechanics necessary to build up a sizable army. Otherwise, you might be a little bit too dependent on the cheese. And, when your back's against the wall, you break out the cheese. That makes perfect sense to me, if that's something that you've prepared. But you also want to be able to fall back on a fundamental, solid, baseline game. And I think 3Crow has the capacity to do that, but does need more training. But it was cool to see him on that path show improvement from the last couple times we've seen him. And I think maybe there was certainly a chance, if that had been a best of 5 again versus Newt, that he scores a game at least. Maybe he still doesn't win the whole series, but he would at least score a game, and he would look scary in all the others. And I feel like that's more than what you could say. I don't think that was Newt regressing in skill either. He said maybe he felt like he wasn't macroing as well as he normally does, but I don't think that factored into it per se. So anyway, we go in away from that, and we think about Group B. Of course, the Battlements continue on, and the second group was the Shambler as Protoss against, I believe it was it 2 Zergs, if I'm not mistaken? Or, yeah, because it was it was Art of Turtle and Jack Yelansky as the 2 Zergs there. This one is kind of funny because due to the availabilities of these players, the Shambler and Jack play together all the time. They've played together in 2 separate invitationals, and now they play together in this group. And then also Art of Turtle and Jack Yelansky was the other Group A upper qualifier match, and it was a 5-game set that went narrowly over to Art of Turtle. Jack scores a win versus Art here in these groups, but otherwise he goes home empty-handed and in last place. And that's unfortunate because, you think maybe he could do a little bit better. And when he ended up exiting in last place, it was a blow to my morale. I gotta say, I'm a big fan of Jack. I think he's a great addition to the community. I love reading through messages that I've missed while sleeping or working or whatever, and I just see 40 reactions and all from him, but they're all great reactions, very well selected for the purpose. He's definitely a fast adopter of the various clown emojis that we have on the server. Big fan of that. And so, yeah, I mean, he's certainly won my heart. Hearts and minds, of course, on the side of Jack, but he doesn't make it through, which is very sad. And I messaged him saying, hey, man, GG's. Sorry you didn't make it in. Thanks for playing, of course. And I thought some of the stuff that you did versus Art of Turtle was pretty snazzy. And he was like, this will only delay my winnings, and that means it will delay the Malkothra core, which is, for those who don't know, is like a Zerg unit that we had the concept for that he dug up off of like internet searches or something, and then is trying to get up to the amount of money that I said as a meme would be required for him to bounty the unit. Which is $333, by the way. And so he's just putting all of his prize winnings into that. Don't tell him. I know he listens to these, but don't tell him. I probably won't wait until he reaches that threshold to start working on the unit. But I really respect the fact that he's like, oh, I lost. And instead of being like, I can't believe I lost, this sucks from like a competitive edge standpoint, he's like, this delays the Malkothra core. I need to win in order to pay for this through prize money. Man, hey, whatever gets you motivated to step to these players that are looking pretty solid from a mechanical and a strategic understanding, whatever motivates you to level up your strategic and mechanical levels in order to be able to defeat them. Hey, whatever works, man, whatever works. But that's really cool. So hats off to that guy. We take a step back and go into the analysis of the last two groups. Group C was Neblime, Taco Cake, and TopRamen. It had two separate, very large surprises. The first was TopRamen smashing Neblime, and it was a competitive game, so smashing is like a little bit superlative. He wins Neblime, he defeats him the first game. And then the second surprise was TopRamen does not qualify because he struggles versus Taco Cake a lot, tries to make this like crazy Wraith style work, the 2-pad opener that actually gave him the best of 5 win in their show match, which came out after Battlements. So it was kind of funny that ended up happening in terms of the release schedule. But I had seen him do that versus Taco Cake before, and he wanted to try to replicate that, but Taco Cake had the right idea and then was able to take it to him. So even though Taco Cake couldn't defeat Neblime, he did defeat TopRamen in both games that they played. And since TopRamen couldn't defeat Neblime a second or third time, that was the end for him. Those were his 4 losses, and he was thus relegated to the 3rd place finish. And that was just shocking. I could not believe it. He did say he'll be back for the next Acropolis. I certainly hope so. I'd love to see him make it through the next gauntlet. He'll have both chances, or however many chances we give for that particular tournament, instead of just the last gauntlet, which is what he showed up for in time recently. And again, he only had 1 chance and he made it through. I mean, he technically, you have 2 chances because it's double a limb, but you know what I mean? He was only here for 1 gauntlet and he made it through. So that was really cool. And then what else did we have? Obviously, Group D. Group D came in. It was Hupsea, General Anakin, the Beaver 99. It was called Brotherly Blood, and the reason for that is because General Anakin and the Beaver 99 have known each other since they basically like childhood friends. And of course, Protoss versus Protoss is one of the matchups that you'd get from that. So that's where like the brotherly part comes from. So multiple facets to that name. But they had avoided each other in the gauntlets despite playing in both gauntlets, despite needing both gauntlets in order to make it in. And yet now they get seated against each other. And the Beaver wasn't able to score a dub, but he looked pretty deadly with the blackjack play. I feel like if his macro was a little bit better and he had the right sense of a timing for a couple of attacks and stabs in, he actually could have gutted Hupsea in the opening, and we would have had 2 groups back to back where like the favorite, the returning old guard, would have capitulated versus like the lowest seed, which is how that decided to go. That would have been really crazy, but the Beaver was not able to make it across from there. And then they've just played, apparently, in the closing interview, General Anakin mentioned that they had played probably more than 100 matches against each other, predominantly, TVP, where Beaver's Terran and General Anakin's Protoss. And General Anakin said the win rate is like 50-50, although he thinks that maybe Beaver thinks it's like 70-30 in General Anakin's favor. But either way, it was still pretty sick to see that happen. So General Anakin exits in 2nd place. Some very interesting Mind Tyrant shenanigans that he tried to tilt Hupsea with. It worked out. And unfortunately not able to get across the line. He doesn't win the match. But, it's still quite interesting. And at the end of it all, to close everything out, he scores the dubs against his local friend, his childhood friend. It must have been a Pyrrhic victory. No, I'm just kidding. Of course, he was like, hell yeah, I'm in. He's like the guy who like bites the metal and sprays the champagne, and then you peel back and it's like third place or whatever. Yeah, he's that guy. Anyway, his celebrations worked out. He makes it on in. And now he has to face the Shambler in the throne room stage, right? So we'll talk a little bit about those throne room matchups as well. So in the quarterfinals, the first of which is Hamster versus Taco Cake. Quarterfinal 2 is Neblime versus Newt. 3 is Hupsea versus Art of Turtle. And 4 is the Shambler versus General Anakin. 2 of those have already been played. Of course, I'm not going to spoil the results yet. But we have a very salivating matchup going into the second bracket, I'll say that much. And then, the bottom side of the bracket, quarterfinals 3 and 4 have yet to be played. One of them will be played tonight, and as of the night of recording, and then the other one will be played tomorrow night, which is actually tonight if you're listening to this the day it does come out. So there you go, some time travel for you. Wednesday and Thursday nights, though, are when those matches are going to be played. So I think we'll be able to cast them all on Thursday, but don't quote me on that. We'll see. Maybe, I mean, a part of it is going to depend on Neblime's availability, of course. He's not going to be around for the second quarterfinal, but we would like to bring the commentary for those live anyway. So hopefully we can do all 4 in one go. So we'll see how that goes. We will try our best to make sure that happens. But yeah, besides that, the throne room matches, I don't know how long this tournament is going to take to conclude. I'm trying not to be too like overly I feel like the pressure to make sure that it happens in a reasonable amount of time isn't as high as it used to be, because back in the day we were thinking we were going to have one of these per month. Well, yeah, then all of a sudden you do need to compress like the playoffs into like 2 weeks and basically do like the first, say like you do Battlements in one day on Saturday, then quarterfinals have to be done before Wednesday so that you can cast them Wednesday, and then round 2 should be scheduled live for Saturday so you can do them live Saturday, and then round 3 has to be done by Wednesday so you can cast those by Wednesday, and then like the next Wednesday obviously, and then the final round that has to be scheduled for Saturday as well. So that's cool. It's great to be able to bring them live if possible, but I don't think we need to worry too much about that this time around. I think we can probably do the from replays move for now. And then the other thing that we can try to do is like, okay, well, hey, if Saturday works out as like we'll just play everything live every Saturday, then does it really matter if the playoffs take like 3 or 4 weekends to conclude or something? Maybe it would drag on and people would stop to like the thing that I would worry about more is that like, well, I can't push to release until these tournaments are done. Or if I push to release, it has to be like audiovisual updates only. It can't be any game balance stuff, right? Because like we don't want to fuck with the competitive integrity of the tournament for obvious reasons. So yeah, I guess that's something where it could be like a limiter on progress for that sort of purpose. But beyond that, I don't know if there is much of a reason. So we still want to make it timely and efficient. The other reason obviously would be that if it goes on for too long, you lose stakes and you forget like, oh shit, you can't really, even as a player, as a competitor, you probably can't really like stick to it in the middle of the match, especially if like pre-release has a bunch of testing for new changes and stuff, and you decide to dabble on those as well. It splits the already quite small player base, although we are growing quite a bit as well. And maybe if you're looking for practice games, people are going to be like, no, I want to try these new balance changes on pre-release, dude. My whole strat is based around the Savant being better or whatever. I don't know, insert thing here, right? And it's like, yeah, okay, well, I guess I won't have any practice, and I also won't be playing on a patch appropriate version or whatever. I don't know. It's definitely a bit wacky. So there are reasons to make sure that you still do it efficiently, but I don't think it's as pressing as like, oh, how are we going to run our monthly tournament if one tournament takes more than a month? I'm not that worried about it anymore. So that's nice. That's a breath of fresh air, and also it allows me to sort of free up some mental energy that I was spending on focusing on the competitive side to just be like, nah, instead let's focus on audiovisuals, mapping, content creation like the tutorials, video creation like the unit profile that I'm going to try to do this week about the Terran bio, stuff like that, right? So I think there's plenty of efforts to make on that front, and just try to keep on keeping on when it comes to like, okay, yeah, you've got this cool competitive stuff going, but what if we don't rely entirely on that? Like, what if we just allow that to sort of simmer for a moment while we focus on other things? I think that makes a lot of sense. So speaking of focusing on other things, let's actually talk about those audiovisual updates, shall we? I already mentioned in the show intro that we've got a couple of those new overlays done and stuff like that, but obviously the cleric being recolored so that its yellow glow is blue, I think is a pretty sick thing. Something that we've been trying for a while, or I've been thinking about for a while, I should say. But only recently did I actually decide to go ahead and do it. I had a little bit of opportunity to do some graphical busy work, and it took me like maybe 30 minutes, maybe less, to make it happen. It's a little bit more convoluted than you might expect initially, because obviously you can't just like color shift all yellow to blue. You have to mask it out so that you're not like touching stuff that shouldn't be done for the cleric. And then there's also like that glow is almost like a muzzle flash that appears on other parts of the sprite, where that also has to be factored into consideration. So all in all, though, I'm happy about how it turned out. Maybe I'll tweak it a little bit later on as well, but I feel like it's overall it does a good enough job for indicating what I'm all about here with regards to that unit. And eventually, when we do like a remodel of it later on, we can obviously just have that change depending on what we want later in the stage. So we can do it a lot more organically instead of doing the Photoshop recolor plus masking method, which is how I got that one done. Pretty cool though. Happy about that. I feel like that'll more immediately indicate to players that, like, hey, there's something different about the cleric now. The medic, right? They'll probably think of it as, when they see it repairing mech that way, they'll probably be fine. Now, I know there's probably like, in some way, it would probably be really cool if we could do like yellow versus when it's repairing bio, and blue when it's repairing mech, but that would be purely for flavor, since there's no distinction for that. Like, there's no change to it. However, I do agree it would be kind of neat. Instead, I just replaced it with blue entirely. So that's what you can expect in the future. The overlays that we have pictured are the Gorgon Slow and the Autocrat sort of reclamation plus armor rend thing. So they're the same graphic, as you might be able to tell, but they are red and green, respectively. So the Gorgon petrification debuff, which slows you down, now has a read associated with it. It doesn't scale with how many stacks there are, which is a little unfortunate, but at the very least, it shows you that something is happening to the unit. And then the green variant for the Autocrat controlled opposition matches the reclamation style stuff. So there is that as well. Going forward, I'm going to try to make some custom visuals for when the turning zombies occur. I'm going to have a custom audio-visual read for that instead of like reusing reclamation, because that makes it really hard to see. The turning is going to have some changes associated with it in accordance with some of the turning matches, which actually 2 of them still have not made it to the channel yet, and they'll be further delayed by the qualification series from Gauntlet B. But that's made me think that maybe we're going to need to start doing like 2 videos per day for a short period of time or something, just so I can clear out this backlog of casts. But the alternative would be that we just have a lot of casted matches for a while. It's just, you could very easily get to a point where like they're outdated, because like, say there's somebody else who plays some good matches on the turning and they don't get casted until like a week from now. And that means that they don't go live until 2 weeks from now, because I have videos scheduled out until like the 21st, and I'll have doing a couple more after I record this show. So yeah, there's like a lot of content in the pipe, but if we wanted to make sure that that content was always current, like maybe by the time somebody sees the next couple of the turning casts after the 2 that are still outstanding, the turning is already done with its revision, like conceptually or whatever, like the changes to it are done, and then it's still the old variant. So that's really awkward if that happens. Ideally we can maybe pump out a couple of additional ones. So maybe we'll do like a 9 a.m. release Eastern time, which is the current release schedule, and like 3 hours later we'll do another round, like schedule another video or something. Maybe that would be cool. Maybe it'll be longer than 3 hours, I'm not sure. But that way there's like, for a short time there'll be double content. We'll see how it goes. But that's something that does occur to me anyway. So yeah, you might see a couple of those kinds of situations happen. We will definitely be keeping that in mind going forward, about the video content. But for sure, you can stay tuned and look for the changes to the turning, the overlays that we're going to be doing as well that we want to add. I want to change the polyite adhesive one to something that's a distinct fire graphic. The overlays that you see on your screen actually come from Vital Device. And Vital Device also had a couple of other graphics that I thought, oh, maybe I can make use of them. And so that's where like the turning zombie rise thing is going to come from. But also from, I think there's like a graphic that I can use instead of what I have currently for the Apollyon adhesive burn, where it'll be obviously not a StarCraft 1 original graphic, and that will help it set itself apart. So at some point, I will be doing that. There's probably one or two other things that I think I already have like stuff for lying around somewhere, but I also took the time to actually go in and amass a list of visual effects that need to be added for abilities. And that includes, in no particular order here, the Ascension and Vengeance buffs for Protoss, a bunch of debuffs from the Protoss, which would be like the Herald, Triumphant Rise, Patriarch, Astral Rule, Pariah, Heretical Bedlam. Some impact effects for when something happens, which are kind of low priority, but it's like Olympian Dishonorable Discharge, Magnetar Law of Attraction. Those two things could definitely use some kind of read for like, hey, this just dealt, this just ignored armor or whatever, right? And then some buffs and debuffs for Zerg. So that would be Nathricor Adrenal Frenzy, Excitralisk Perpetual Wind, Ultracore Kaiser Rampage, and then the debuffs for the infestation stuff, the Matroleth Blissful Embrace and the Ekestricor Devouring Instinct. So if we can, as long as like basically, if there's a debuff that has those kinds of game-changing impacts and stuff, there definitely should be, I don't know. There definitely should be some details, right? It's like, what can we do about improving visual clarity so that you at least know that something is happening to the unit, even if you're not really sure what that is and you need time to identify it. So going through and processing a couple more graphics from whatever sources we can scrounge up is definitely going to be a priority. I did try Ember Gen for creating particles in the past, but it was a pretty convoluted pipeline. Like it would require me to spend maybe a week or so or more to really learn it. And it's also not free. So in order to actually do that, I would need to pay some considerable money. And when I don't have it's not like I can just make everything in 1 month's time because I have the know-how. So I would need to really study how to use the program. And that is not something that I can do right now with all the time that is being gobbled up by other things. So we're going to wait on that one, but eventually I'm sure we'll be hard at work on our own graphics instead. Maybe I'll stick to the Blender pipeline for now or something and create a couple of odds and ends. I've done that with some projectiles and stuff in the past too. So anyway, audiovisual passes continue. We'll continue making more stuff. I did adjust the sound presence of the Terran add-on construction sound, try to improve that. Because it was a little bit too noisy. So I think I've done a good job with that. And then the Zerg births as well have been more or less completed. The only graphics that we need for births now, the Zobrialisk, which is a unit that's not yet implemented, that needs a graphic. And then there's also the Excitralisk and the Mutalisk are dual birth, but the graphics that I made for them, or the graphics that they came with, in the case of the Mutalisk, those birth graphics only show as one birth. So making dual birth variants of those is also on the cards. But those are the only 3 cases, I believe, for birth animations, that I have written down. So that's Mutalisk and Excitralisk. We have to redo them for double. And then the Zobrialisk, which just doesn't have one. When the unit is actually implemented, I'll make one for it. So there you go. That's the audiovisual update for sure. I'm excited about that. And I always think it's good to have stuff like that, right? I feel like you want the game to be more legible for sure, and so this is an important step towards that. Let's talk about some balance changes, though, because there are more thoughts on balance as of late. What with the competitive style, competitive tournaments drawing a lot of attention, and we have a lot more people playing than ever before. I will say a few words on some of the people who have recently joined, like EUD64, eCalypso, obviously TopRamen is in this list as well. And I think the other thing, there's somebody else. I guess I'm thinking of Grunch, who's been around for a little bit. That's Urbmon's brother. But he's recently switched to Zerg, and he's been playing a lot more of that with our crew, where I don't know if he's been playing with Urbmon or whatever otherwise. But yeah, it's really cool to see him in action and stuff. And all of these people have they might have their own suspicions about something that might be imbalanced or something that might be, not very good in terms of its execution, or like currently being used in a way that isn't in accordance with that idea, right? The original concept. But they're willing to see it through and really identify it, right? Like we've had some people who are still with the project, and also some people who have moved on from the project, who came to a certain conclusion about like their preferred race doesn't work for this reason, something very extreme like that would mean that basically like their race is unplayable from their POV, or they've maybe come to more subtle conclusions, or lower stakes conclusions, like a certain unit is just overpowered, but still something that would imply that like, oh, there's like a really critical issue here, and that they would sometimes arrive at those conclusions with their first encounter with the unit, or with like the first couple of times they tried a certain strategy and then would dismiss it. And so it's I don't expect that we're going to get this lucky all the time, but it's very nice that some of the more recent, cohorts, some of the most recent people who have been inculcated into the project have walked on in and said, oh, okay, yeah, there's some wacky stuff in this, but I'm willing to believe that maybe there's an answer to it. I mean, there's so many choices that we have. Surely there must be a way to make it happen. And so, with all that said, I think it's been really nice to read some of the comments on the YouTube channel lately about certain strategies that look really powerful in the casts, and then people speculate on them in the comments section. That's really cool. It's also really cool to see people joining lately, like I mentioned, Ecalypso, EUD64, and Grunch's Zerg Resurgence. That stuff is pretty legit, and I feel like being able to see that in action, and have these people sort of take their time before they suggest that something might be imbalanced, or even if they think something's imbalanced, they share it, but with like the understanding that like, well, also like maybe the way that they ask that question is more like, is there a reaction to this? How can we respond to this? What can we do about it, right? And, there's some things that are planned to be changed, and we're going to talk about those in this section. But I felt like it was prudent for me to mention, hey, guys, some people around here are pretty legit with the way that they approach even discussing game balance, and I really appreciate that. Even though, I can still engage with other people who maybe have more, incendiary takes or something about the way that the game is balanced currently. But I just find it a lot easier to immediately start talking about the actual thing if I don't have to pierce through like somebody making a concrete statement about something that maybe they only just now encountered, right? It's very possible that like the Mind Tyrant, for example, is really OP because of XYZ thing. But if this is the first time you've ever encountered it, then you complain about it being overpowered. And this is just a purely hypothetical example, because this actually did not happen. Hapsea didn't know what to do with it when he first encountered it, but he doesn't necessarily think it's OP. And I would say the same for TopRamen and for EUD and stuff like that, who've recently encountered the Mind Tyrant. But I was just using that as a hypothetical example, so just to clarify that as well. So anyway, let's actually talk about some balancing ideas that we have. Definitely one of the things that comes to mind is, I would say that like when it comes to the way that you try to design a game, like when you have so many tools, there's probably a response to anything that's overpowered, like something that's totally busted or whatever. There's probably something you can do about it because there's so many tools. It's like, surely there is. But that doesn't mean that it's not still worthwhile to rein in certain things that are overpowered, or to bring up certain things that are underpowered or undertuned or whatever. And the reason why you would want to do that is because you wouldn't want the game that has so many choices, so many units, so many potential strategies and compositions to boil down to, really, there's only one choice that's actually meta. And that's an extreme statement to arrive at. That's an extreme place to arrive at, but that doesn't mean that it's not possible. So you'd still want to adjust things based on what you think is fair, what you think is reasonable, and what you think is, the ideal thing. But it may end up being that my conception of what the ideal reality is for like a matchup balance, for example, like say Terran versus Zerg, maybe my conception of Terran versus Zerg is that the Terran should probably be the one to be the aggressor, and they should punish the Zerg if they get too greedy, and they should constantly try to manage the Zerg, and they should have some aspect of that where there's like they're called upon to make proactive decisions. And like, if that's my conception of the matchup, then if somebody steps in and says, hey, I'm Zerg and the Terran always has map control over me, then maybe that's not actually that big of a deal, even if like if it's even true, right? Like, maybe they're just bad at taking map control as Zerg or versus Terran or something. You can get as granular or as broad as you like with the potential cases. And that's where I always try to refer back to this idea that, like, I look for data. I look for when you actually see this thing in action. Okay, then you can really assess it. And you can imagine counterplay. You can imagine the counterpunch and stuff. So philosophically, I really like to wait for data. And I don't like to knee-jerk react to certain things. The only time I'll tend to change stuff pretty drastically, especially over a short period of time and not a long period of time, is if it becomes very evident to me that with the current player pool that we have now, and in a way that I don't think this would ever change with higher skill players, the unit is like irrevocably broken or something, or maybe useless in the case of, like, maybe I'm buffing something pretty significantly or whatever. And even that can be dangerous. But if I'm faced with data that indicates that this is irrevocably, like, busted and not really what I want, either in a positive or negative direction, like it's too powerful or it's too weak, that will be when I make more significant changes. But I think we're more or less past that point now. So I wanted to cover a couple of things in this balance consideration section. First up is the stockade. I wrote about this and some of the other details here that I will cover in the recent Cosmonarch's Compass, but the stockade has the Covenant add-on, it has the Shaman from the Vestry, and has the Eidolon from the Covenant. And those three may receive mineral cost reductions, which would be minus 25 apiece. So the Shaman would become 125 minerals, Covenant would become 75 minerals, Eidolon would become 50 minerals. That is a proposition that I'm currently, a proposal, I guess you could say, that I'm currently investigating in my head and turning over and thinking about. And the concept that I would have here is that you could incorporate those units, and that add-on in particular, with the rest of your arsenal alongside more mineral demanding compositions. Like, you could mix in Shamans with Mech, you could mix in obviously Shamans with Mass Maverick or whatever, a little bit easier if they cost less minerals. You could do the same with Eidolons if you're making Eidolon Maverick Hurakan or something like that, or even like Eidolon Maverick Cleric. Suddenly you have a little bit more minerals to spend per Eidolon. That means that you can balance your expenditure a little bit more. Most of your gas can go towards the Eidolons at that point. So these are like thoughts that I have, right? Of like, maybe this could be something to change. Something I didn't cover in the article that I was also throwing around in my head recently is what if we +1 ranged the Cyprian? The Cyprian, I believe, currently has 6 weapon range, if I'm not mistaken. And yes, it does. Giving it 7 weapon range would make it equivalent in terms of its weapon range with the Goliath. The Dracodon also has 6 weapon range, so giving it 7 range would allow it to outrange the Dracodon, but the Dracodon has the movement speed and durability advantage over the Cyprian, so I don't think that would be the end of the world. I don't remember if anything at tier 1 for Zerg has 7 or more range. Obviously, the Bactylisk does, so I guess you can factor that in as 7. Although a Kisilisk as well, so I guess that's probably fine. I don't think anything has 6 range, though, right? The Hydra is 5 range. Obviously, Quasi is 4 range. I guess that's pretty much it for tier 1 Zerg as far as the ranged units go. So, when we're considering it from that perspective, what does it become better against as a +1 weapon range unit? Probably a little bit of everything because it can engage from a further distance away. But I guess the one problem that I would be a little bit concerned about is, does it become, does it degenerate into Cyprians just being used inside garrisons, since the garrisons get +2 range? And do those garrisons mostly exist on the high ground for the purposes of really heavily holding on to territory? But maybe that's fine as a concept, as long as the maps continue to shy away from overhangs that allow you to easily defend your natural with the cliff advantage or whatever. And so, because, you'd go from, currently you have 6 range if you're inside an anchor, that's +2, and if you're on the high ground, that's +2. So you go from 6 to 8 range with one of those, or 10 range with both, and obviously that would be 9 with one or 11 with both in a world where you had +1 range. And then all of a sudden, you're outranging most of the units in the game if you're inside a high ground anchor. But that's a pretty, I would say, since we're adding more unbuildable terrain near ramps, with at least 3 to 4 weapon range worth of tiles being added on average as like a conception. That like in the same world where in a post Acropolis 1 world where this change gets made, the maps are changing in a way that probably won't be, that big of a deal. So like the degenerate cases I can point to of like, here's what I worry about as like this unit having +1 weapon range becomes really, perverted and becomes negative for the game overall in these situations. Well, the way that you can make use of those situations is becoming a lot less commonplace. So I really don't know if it's actually that big of a deal. I feel like maybe in the Cyprian case, giving it +1 weapon range wouldn't be the end of the world. We don't see it being used that often, although when we do see it used en masse, it is quite potent. I know some people were saying, what if you like subtract 25 gas cost to it or something? But I actually don't know that that's that big of a deal. I think it's probably good that it costs 50 gas because it is a unit that can do so much. So maybe in addition to the +1 weapon range, something that we might be able to do is maybe give it like 1 armor or something small like that, where it increases its durability for certain matchups in certain contexts, like versus Mavericks, for example, to make it better versus Bio or whatever. There's like little things like that. Like the Cyclops doesn't have any armor penetration either, right? So anyway, I think it's worth considering. Like there's a chance that stuff like that moves it in the right direction. Adding range is a really big deal, and adding, changing the mobility of the unit, I wouldn't necessarily want to do that because I think it's good that it moves slow, that you have to kind of like rein yourself in when it comes to that mobility. Maybe I could see like a 10% move speed increase or something very minor, but I would still want it to be slower than the rest of the infantry, right? As a general rule. And then when it comes to the Zerg tutorial, I'm reading ahead of myself. When it comes to the rest of the stockade stuff that I talked about, the changes that I would make to like potentially make the other units cheaper, like the Eidolon, the Shaman, and of course the Covenant add-on. The one I'm least certain about is the Covenant add-on. I feel like making it less minerals might not be that big of a deal anyway, because people can already fit them into their builds as it currently stands, since they make savants. The question is, can they fit the Eidolon into their build? And it's maybe the answer is no, because it's both a decent mineral cost and a pretty steep gas cost. Now they happen to be the same cost, but that's just the way that the resources work out. So if you're already spending a steep gas cost, you probably don't want to also be spending a decent mineral cost. You probably want to be spending a fairly cheap mineral cost overall. And I think 50 is a lot cheaper than 75 at this stage of the game that you might be rushing out Eidolons at. So there you have it. Some more thoughts on that. As we take a step further into the balance section, I'll just mention again the Mind Tyrant. The one thing that I want to change about the Mind Tyrant for sure is that when you're receding control, and this would also extend to the Demiurge, the unit should be transferred to neutral, and it should not be transferred to basically you should not automatically acquire it as a target. And I'll think about how to accomplish that technically, because just giving the unit to neutral is not always enough internally. So I'll have to think about that. Like maybe I have to go into the acquire automatic target logic and say like, is this unit receding instead of is this unit neutral? Like specifically check for that. And if so, just don't automatically acquire it. That doesn't mean that you can't still attack left click it or even right click it potentially and see what you can do there. Well, I feel like that would be good. I wouldn't want him to be invincible, because I think it's fine if you want to manually target it down from either side of the equation. But I would want it to be something that doesn't automatically acquire as a target. And that would solve a lot of problems, I think, with the edge case stuff, right? There's 2 other talking points here that I haven't decided to make changes about. I'm not sure I'll make changes about, but I have some thoughts on. The Terran Tier 3 being really expensive. I think this is fine if they produce units faster than the other races, and they currently do. Versus Zerg, versus Protoss. I don't know about versus Zerg. So that would be something to think about, is like, oh, it's really expensive to get to the point where I can make Phobos and Hippogriffs. Well, maybe Phobos and Hippogriffs should be maybe slightly cheaper, but definitely in terms of time cost, maybe they should be more significantly cheaper, like minus 10 seconds or 20 seconds even, depending on the unit in question. Maybe that could be something that I could work in. And the idea would be that, yes, it's expensive to put this production structure down, but once this infrastructure is complete, you can churn out units of a given tier faster than your enemies can, or at the very least keeping pace with something like, mass macro Zerg or whatever. So that's something that I was thinking about. And the Zerg macro specifically came up as a conversation point of is Zerg macro too easy? Would players that were really good at this game each peel off to one playing Terran, one playing Zerg, and the Zerg player always ends up being better just because their macro is easier to do? Or are there like, push and pulls to that? And for me, it's weird because some of the people who are saying that maybe Zerg macro is too easy are also people who have studied Brood War and or Starcraft 2 a lot. And therefore, they know that Zerg do the same kind of stuff in those games, and the way that you counteract that is by punishing them, by harassing them, by pushing into them, by making it so that they are uncomfortable, basically. That when you leave a Zerg to be comfortable, they are actually they are the strongest race. That's true in Brood War. I believe that's true in StarCraft 2 currently. I'm not sure. It definitely seemed like it was true before then as well, but we don't have the benefit of having a very long amount of time on the same patch for StarCraft 2. But I don't know about Legacy of the Void now, which is obviously the longest running expansion, although it has changed considerably since it first started. So anyway, I bring that up because that's another talking point that's recently come up, and I'm not 100% sure about how we're going to approach making changes to that. If we are going to make changes to it, I haven't decided that we need to yet, but it is on the, I guess you could say that it's on the radar now, and has been for a little bit now, but I still need to see evidence that, like, over a prolonged period of time, again, going back to what we started this whole section about, is it just that this is your first time playing against a really solid macro Zerg that can do these sorts of things, and you weren't able to pressure them and stuff? Or is it the case that, like, instead, the way that you defeat the Zerg comes from not allowing them to get to that critical mass comfortably, so that they're always on a bit of a trepidatious position where they can't necessarily, make magic happen or whatever? So those are the kinds of things that I would like to get identification on. Like, is it actually impossible to control them, or is controlling them the way forward, and making it so that they're never really truly comfortable about the situation that they've achieved, but they just are trying their best to not die while also trying to develop and scale up? So that would be my question. Basically, like, are the requirements for controlling the Zerg too much for it to be sane or it to be ideal? Or is it just that we don't actually know what those requirements are yet because it's an underexplored matchup? Like that, those could be true as well. So figured I would note those down so people know that they are being heard. I am paying attention to them. And so there you have it. Let's go to the Zerg tutorial and some campaign planning. Obviously, I've not really been able to get too much work done on the Zerg tutorial in the last week. I was finishing up some Counter-Strike 2 casting where I stood in for a couple extra best of threes, including the grand final, which is pretty cool. But that obviously constrained my time pretty heavily. And obviously I had part-time work as well, and was mostly focused on the Battlements, the Gauntlets, and now planning for the Throne Room phase. So as I get into some more video planning, like I made that hype video for the Battlements phase, it was pretty epic. People seem to really like it. I think it was pretty cool. Definitely the best work that I've done so far. Sorry, Nude, I put your race down incorrectly. It won't happen again, hopefully. When it comes to the plans for single-player content and co-op content and stuff, let's just say that after the first Acropolis is fully done, this will be the primary focus. Whatever the Zerg tutorial still needs, if it's not done before the tournament is finished, that will be the prime sort of focus. But also after that, I really want to finish up, I probably want to make like Day of Blood and maybe Reign of Sand as well, but they're both Terran-focused campaigns, so I don't know that I would do that. But Day of Blood for sure. I want to make. It's a campaign where you play initially as Upstart, and then it shifts into you controlling tech owned by the Futurist Federation. So it will require some faction-related work. But I'm pretty happy with the idea of banging that out because it's TVT, and then it goes from TVT to TVZ, and there's FFAs involved and stuff, and there's only 6 maps, so it's definitely doable. I really want to make that happen. So that'll be after the Zerg tutorial. Then we'll probably think about like updating those tutorials in general with any lessons that we've learned that need to be applied to all 3 of them. And then after that, we'll probably move on to releasing or working on like a full campaign, right? Stuff like To Touch the Sun, finally finishing up the tile set for the Zerg organ tile set, right? Like the hive organ stuff. That will be really sick. And then, going away from there. So that's a rough sort of roadmap. Obviously not a great amount of progress has been made yet, so I can't say that like, oh, hey, check out all this progress that we made. Isn't that so epic? Because we haven't really made any progress on the Zerg tutorial yet, but that'll change since I am streaming all this week. Off to a good start so far, and I'll be streaming later today as well. So there you have it. Let's move on to the community roundup before we close out with the coffee questions. I want to take this community roundup opportunity to once again shout out EUD64, Ecalypso, Grunch, and TopRamen for playing so many games lately. We've had a lot of people playing a lot of games. We also had Vicious Box step in. He's Taco Cake's brother. He's been playing for a little bit now. And then we also had, I want to say there was a couple of other people who stepped in for just a moment, but I'm trying to remember their names off the top of my head. I know Huge Boulder was one. He played again recently, and he's still pretty new to it, I guess, but hopefully he's having fun. So there you go. A little bit of a shout out to just the people who have been hanging out. Obviously, Hamster, Neblime, Newt, Benno, Biddy B, a bunch of those people, 3Crow, have been playing. The Night Fox was playing, but then he said, I don't have enough time to get good at this game, and left. I don't know what that's about. I'll still cast your game, homie. I'm sure you'll see that in your YouTube feed and then be like, oh man, remember when I could smash 3Crow with 360-degree surrounds? That was cool. I guess I'll come back. Or maybe he won't. But either way, I hope he enjoyed his time while he was here. And yeah, that's pretty sick. All in all, I love the people who are coming on in. But let's be honest, the real thing that we usually talk about here is maps and other community-related developments. And I will say that Dead Infested made a video about the Savant recently. I haven't checked it out yet, but he posted it. The tier lists are out, so you can make your own tier list videos if you want. They're pinned in CM Talk, so you can check those out in the Discord server. And then, what else? Oh, Dead Infested also made a meme video about spinning a bunch of Mavericks on top of Watchdogs, and that's pretty funny. And then, other than that, though, the maps have come out. So we've got Maxium, which is a 4-spawn version of Axiom. That's, of course, by Biddy B. And then Ithaca, a 4-spawn desert map by the Shambler. And so both of those maps are available for testing for those of you who are interested. Love me some 4-spawn maps. Definitely want more of those. And Biddy B started work on a Badlands map, and the Shambler started work on a Twilight map. So both of those are also 4-spawn, and I'm sure we will see those in action a bit later as well. So they're not done yet. They're not playable yet as of the time of recording, but definitely keep an eye out. I'm sure Biddy B and the Shambler will release them at some point. So there you go. Thanks, homies, for making maps and for making videos and for playing games especially. Love to see that we get so many games played these days. And that will do it for this very short community roundup. And we are on to the coffee questions. I am so excited. Fair warning, I paused to open the window and I am now standing up. So if you sense a change in audio quality or whatever, that's what's happening. And there you go. You have been warned. Let's go into the coffee questions. For those who don't know, we do accept donations for project development, for personal development, I guess, through the coffee website. That's, I guess it used to be called Buy Me a Coffee or whatever. It's ko-fi.com/PrNoGoNVeek7. You can see it in the bottom left of your screen. And when you submit donations to us, you can tell us if they're for prize pools, if they're for us instead to keep, or if they're indeed for a bounty. You got to talk with us a little bit before then, after, or after or whatever, just to make sure that the bounty amount that you're sending in is corresponding to the task in particular. Certain things are allowed and certain things are not. Like if you bounty us to nerf Protoss, yeah, we're probably not going to do that. But if you bounty us instead to, say like, oh, I want this feature added to this game mode or something, then that would be one thing that you could definitely send in a request for. And assuming the money is agreed upon as far as the value goes, we will get to it when we can. I have been very slacking on the bounties recently, but that will change now that we are through the Counter-Strike 2 casting phase. I will finally do the clown stream. I will finally make those Biddy B things happen. And I think that might be, I forget what else we have even for the bounties. But anyway, yeah, we have that. It's just, there's like a Zerg unit I have to implement as a bit of a meme, so that's another thing. But yeah, there you go, some bounty talk, and indeed, the other perks that you get in addition to having a private chat with other donators and, of course, ourselves, Pr0totype and Veek. You also have the ability to get these videos released to you a day early, these prototype episodes, the Crow's Nests as well. And you also get to ask questions on both of those publications, both of those shows. So we are going to kick things off, as we often do, with none other than Myrian, who asks, how would you go about designing a fictional language? Well, that's an interesting question. It made me immediately think about Balethal, who I know has been very busy lately, but he's a project contributor. He's contributed a couple of things like the Dracodon remodel. He's definitely contributed a lot when it comes to designing a bunch of things. He was the author, I guess the author, you could say, the artist behind the old title music that we had back in the day. We might decide to throw that back in for like a Zerg theme at some point. I'm not sure. Maybe it's a little bit too noisy. We'll see. That could definitely be something that we could add in for in-game, just what would you call it? Like, I think we have to actually extend the in-game music at some point anyway, but being able to do that would be pretty cool if we could make that happen. So just something to think about. But yeah, he's been around for a while. And so he actually has a video on his channel. Let me see if I can go find it real quick, because I'll link it in the description if I can, where it's creating conlangs, constructed languages, right? So if we say, how to create a conlang Bailethal, maybe we will find it on YouTube. Yeah, look at that. So we'll go ahead and link that here. I'll say Baelethal's video on conlangs. And then it's really cool to me that he has so many interests. Baelethal is kind of like a Renaissance man in a way, where he just obviously has his own work that he's got swallowed up in lately, but he's made custom campaigns, he's written conlangs, he's created custom, a bunch of like modded stuff for like Warcraft 3, Starcraft 2, Starcraft 1. He has many different interests. He's done a little bit of programming, a little bit of modeling, a little bit of texturing, a little bit of voice acting and editing, and music creation and sound effect creation and stuff like. He's just done so many things. So anyway, enough talking about that. But that's what it made me think of. And so, if I was going to design a fictional language, I would definitely be, watching that video by Baelethal, watching videos by other people on the subject, doing a little bit of linguistic exercise in that respect. In some ways, I already have constructed a couple of like fictional languages, but I forget, there's a term for them, and I don't even know if it's covered in that video or not, but it's like when you only know like 3 words or whatever in the video or in the medium that they come from. Like the Kala language for Protoss is something that I know Baelethal knows a lot about. But as far as we as players of StarCraft 1 know, there's like a couple of words that some of the Protoss use, but most of the time it's like Entaro, which is like in the memory of, like, so Entaro Adun is in the memory of Adun. And then there's like, I don't know, there's a couple of other little things here and there that are just like you hear, Protoss speech every now and then. And it's not very like clear what it means, but it means something, I guess. And so that's usually how I try to create my languages, is like, I might know what these words mean, and if push came to shove, I could write like, I could try to do stuff like that, where I would like actually go through and design like grammar rules and stuff. But for the most part, I just have proper nouns or little phrases that I use, like Ken instead of clan or family or whatever is like for that's the equivalent of that. Ken is the equivalent of those words for the Keltar in Zabalba and stuff like that, right? I've done a little bit of additional work on stuff like that for the D&D setting, the tabletop setting, for the what do you call it? I think I had it. Yeah, I have a couple of words here. Macrolon are supreme inheritors. Da is under, Seer is walking creature, Kret is machine or animus, Ren is rifle or gun, Undar is breather or lungs. So there's like things like that, right? So okay, I've got a couple of words that I've written down. And then, I don't know, like if I was going to go a whole hog and really start designing a fictional language and going into like grammar rules and past participles and all this other stuff, like linguistic stuff that really makes sure that like you could basically write an essay in this custom language, that would be, I feel like that's where it's, for me, I don't really see the utility in it from the perspective of creating a game. Like that's a lot of extra work, and the mileage that you get out of it doesn't necessarily match up with it, unless you really are trying to like get other people to learn this language the way that I know like Tolkien had many people who, by the success of his works, learned the language. And then there's people who learned Klingon and stuff like that from Star Trek. It's like, whoa, okay, man. So, there's, I think it's Sindarin, or maybe I'm thinking of some other thing. I think Sindarin is the language. Anyway, like the point is, okay, you've got all these languages that some people will actually go through the trouble of learning. The super nerds, the super fans will go through the trouble of learning. But what is it going to enrich the experience to the same degree that, is it corresponding with the effort? Normally, when you put in effort to something, you want it to be able to give you more effort, more than what you put in out. You want to get out of it, right? So in general, and that doesn't mean that you don't want to put in any work. It means that you want to put in a lot of work so that you get a lot of returns from that. If you know what I understand, like if you're getting 2-for-1 returns, that doesn't mean, oh, I'm just going to put in like, a lazy work, because then you'll only get like 2x on the lazy work that you did. You want to get you want to put in 100 of something, because then you'll get like 5,000x return or something like that. I don't know. You're just random ballpark numbers, but that's sort of what I'm getting at. And I feel like on the plus minus EV of like, what can I expect as a return for making a fictional language? I guess like there would be some utility to it for sure. Like I can't even deny that. There'd definitely be some utility to it. You get really nicely developed into understanding the ins and outs on a very intimate level of like one particular race or culture or species or whatever creates the, whatever speaks the language. But you would not necessarily then be left with like a functioning game or, an interesting and well-developed race. You would just know that they would speak a language. So I guess what I'm saying is it's great from the perspective of doing it. That's how I would do it. I would do it like, I would study how you create a conlang, like in that Battlements video. I would study a lot of like basic linguistic concepts for like what makes languages different from each other. And then I would try to create something that on an aesthetic level, like guttural versus elegant or whatever, matches the intended aesthetics and thematics of a given race that speaks them. But I don't think I would design a fictional language for those reasons. I guess I didn't. Getting bogged down by the would I actually do it maybe interrupted the how would I do it if I had to do it for whatever reason answer. But there you go. That's my answer to the question. Hopefully it was lucid enough for you to get something out of it there, Myrian. Now, let's go into the next question. It's actually by, I don't know if he wants to go by TopRamen here as well. His Discord username is Intrinsic Ramen, but TopRamen, his first time through as a donator for a question on one of these shows. And he says, how would you redesign Warcraft 3 hero units? If you were given the opportunity to redesign them, what would I do? Would I do anything to redesign them? Well, isn't that the question? It's funny that I'm recording this episode now because just yesterday we were talking about Warcraft 3 and how it's really, I think it was the fall point, the failure point for a lot of RTS games. Like after that game came out, because it eventually did numbers and was successful from a financial standpoint, it was also successful from an ideas proliferation standpoint, even though those ideas didn't end up actually being good. And that's a really confusing point, and it would take ages to actually explain. But the long and short of it would be like, most people played Warcraft 3 for custom maps, not for the core gameplay experience, like by volume. And so that translates to sales, but not because of Warcraft 3's ideas. In fact, I would go a step further and say you wouldn't be seeing most of the players play customs if the core game was good. You would see some people play customs in addition to playing the core game, and a small minority of people would play only customs, and a plurality of people would play only the main game. I think that's probably how it would be. Maybe a plurality of people would play, or a majority of people would play a mix with very much leaning towards the main game as the main thing. But either way, like the main game would still be the main attraction, right? The core game would be the main attraction. And that's not what you saw from Warcraft 3. It was very quickly overshadowed in terms of its competitive scene and its I guess conventional melee scene, if you want to call it just like, 3v3s and stuff or whatever, team games, casual games like that. It's very quickly overtaken by the customs, which is not really the same thing as Brood War and StarCraft 2 as well, funnily enough. So you can't even say that StarCraft 2 had the same issue. I guess StarCraft 2 is overtaken by co-op to some degree, at least in terms of what made them money, for sure, with the microtransactions. I'm not sure about player numbers. They don't really release those data. But when it comes to the customs and stuff, like that's definitely what was the primary selling point for Warcraft 3. But it still translated into sales, and then people would say, oh, Warcraft 3 was super successful, let's copy Warcraft 3, not realizing that the success didn't come from their ideas. So these ideas were proliferated through the industry, but they were bad ideas and they led to bad games because Warcraft 3 itself was a bad game. And they just didn't happen to have like the same pull in terms of the Blizzard logo making people think it was a good game, and then also having pretty good flexibility for making custom games, and then people making a lot of custom games and playing a lot of custom games because the base game was not good in the first place. Thus, Warcraft 3 is good is actually like, really wacky in order to try to deconstruct. So it's very much it's a case that's not like very many other games. I'll put it to you that way. So the reason I give that little context in is because that was actually recently a topic of conversation for a short time on the Discord server. So sometimes we'll talk about like games in particular and say like, oh yes, this game is like interesting as a case for like what happened after that. And Warcraft 3 is one such game, in my opinion. It introduced 3D to a franchise, to a setting, an IP, if you want to call it that, with Warcraft. That previously wasn't 3D, and with that came a lot of concessions. You had smaller scale fights, slower gameplay by a significant margin. You had upkeep, which is an anti-scaling mechanic, and you also had heroes, which are also anti-scaling because they take up a lot of food in the competitive space. Right? They take up 5 food. They also take all of your attention and focus it in on one unit. A lot of your attention goes into one unit or a small minority of units or whatever. And they obviously brought us closer to MOBAs, right? In terms of the control scheme, in terms of the where you spent your attention. So I like to think of the RTS in general, by the way, and I said this in the conversation, as like playing an RTS and playing it well, playing a good RTS, having a good RTS experience involves basically doing a lot of different tasks, like I call it crisis management, but on multiple levels. So it's like some of the things that you're managing, some of the things that you're doing, some of the tasks you're carrying out have nothing to do with your opponent really. Or if they do, it's like that's a way that there's emergent gameplay coming from it, but they don't intrinsically have to involve your opponent. And that's things like harvesting resources, building up your infrastructure, expanding your territory, building improved technology, massing an army, scouting, and those sorts of things. Like those things, I mean, technically scouting is what you're doing. You're scouting your enemy. But like you don't need an enemy to scout. You can still explore the map without an enemy. There's no point to it, obviously, but you could say that about everything else I just said. So now you think about the things that are like basically those things that I just outlined, that list of things, you could have as part of like a city builder or a more casual game that doesn't have opposition. That's more like Factorio, I guess. I mean, technically there's AI enemies in Factorio, but they're fucking biter and spitter, so I don't even want to think about them. No, but for real, they're not really the same thing that we're talking about, right? It's like you can imagine a world where you play Factorio, but there are no enemies. Like you'd still have a purpose to do. You just wouldn't have a threat that like codifies that purpose into something that you don't have a hell to run away from. You only have a heaven to strive towards, I guess. And so like that's what city builders are like. And then what action games are like is like attacking the enemy and overcoming them through positional power and better strategy and better skill, better precision. And I'm taking kind of great lengths to avoid talking about individual mechanical things that are unique to RTS games or generally are found in RTS games, like controlling an army for that purpose or whatever. But like what separates, the RTS from a MOBA, an action game, a city builder, it's that like they do all of the things that you do inside a city builder and an action game / MOBA, but they do them all at once, right? And so that's basically what the RTS is to me. And so Warcraft 3 has mechanics within it, systems within it, like upkeep and heroes that actually run counter to what I'm thinking. Is like all of these actions happen at scale and they happen away from each other. And also they can intertwine. Like you try to expand, which is normally something that you would imagine as something that's like player versus environment or just like it's not versus anything. It's just something you do, but your enemy tries to deny you from doing that. And suddenly they are interacting with you in a way that is benefiting them, but not in something that had to involve them necessarily. And so there's like emergence that comes from that. And the heroes are like basically focusing a lot of attention from both players down to something that doesn't really relate to the RTS at its core. And it doesn't really relate to what we're talking about with like armies and actions at scale and stuff like that, right? It's anti-scale, and the same as upkeep. Upkeep is literally saying, hey, you build a large army, now you're punished for it. So I don't know. I mean, they've been on the record saying a couple of different things, some of which were maybe a little contradictory. Like some of them were saying that it was engine limitations that made them consider upkeep, and some of them were saying that they actually just wanted you to have smaller armies from a design standpoint. I would be more likely to believe the technical reason than the design reason, and maybe the design reason came out of coping with the technical limitation or something, but I can only speculate. That's just the information that has been presented to me from first-party sources, like interviews with Blizzard Entertainment developers and stuff back then, and producers as well. But when it comes to the way that Warcraft 3 is put together, the heroes themselves are like, how would I try to redesign them? That's the core question. And we're going back to a question that, like, he says, like, would I do anything? Like, I would be much more excited about removing heroes and focusing the game around core RTS concepts, like expanding and building large armies and attacking at scale and, progressing through a tech tree. And you do some of those or all of those within the context of Warcraft 3, without the large army part, I guess. You build an army, though, and you manage your food and try to, people came up to this idea where they try to stay at an equilibrium level, where they try to stay underneath 50 or 60 food, I think it is. Maybe it is 50 food. I think it's under 50 food. Try to stay at or under 50 food for a long time, and then they jump up above that food count all at once to minimize the amount of time that they lose gold to upkeep. And so if they need like the extra 20 supply or even 40 supply or 50 supply or whatever it is to go all the way up to max supply, if they need that for whatever reason, then the way that they accomplish that is by staying at 50 food for as long as possible and then spiking all at once. And I feel like that's just a silly workaround that you shouldn't really have to do. I feel like it goes against what an RTS is really all about. And certainly what I find interesting in an RTS. So even if people out there don't agree with like the objective presentation of this, like, an RTS is about scale to me. So if an RTS doesn't have scale, at the very least, I subjectively don't like it. And if an RTS is not about scale, I would hold that means that it is not really living up to the billing of the genre, since the whole point is like actions at scale. And if you don't have these actions at scale, then you don't have the RTS. But even if you disagree with that assessment of what an RTS is, you can still at the very least understand where I'm coming from when I say I like things that scale, and yet I don't like the way that Warcraft 3 does it because it constrained scale. That's like by design, has all these systems that do that. So would I remove heroes versus redesign them? Yeah, I would remove them. But if I was going to redesign them, I think you can make heroes better than what they did before. I think I would probably avoid the idea of the heroes being leveling up. I actually had redesigned them conceptually as champions way back when I was working on a Warcraft 3 revision back in 2019 maybe, or 2018, something like that. It was definitely pre-COVID. I'm thinking maybe it was like 2017, 2018, something like that. I basically was thinking about doing like what Cosmonarchy did for Starcraft 1. I was thinking about maybe doing that for Warcraft 3 before Cosmonarchy was even called Cosmonarchy. It used to be called Project Hydra. So the joke was that Warcraft 3 was going to get a Project Hydra as well, and that I was going to make it. And so I experimented with like reducing max HP by 2/3 as a general rule, increasing attack rate by 1/3 as a general rule, and then standardizing damage so that it wasn't random. And I did a bunch of other things that were kind of difficult and tedious to accomplish. And then I found out that like AI would just not at all function with these changes. If they took any damage at all, they would start fleeing, because the way that their flee code works, it checks for hard-coded HP values instead of a percentage HP value. So it's like, hey, you should flee at 200 health instead of, hey, you should flee at at 20% health or something. So yeah, that was really silly. And that made it so that, like, for example, the Crypt Fiends would flee as soon as you attack them, because like by default they're very expensive. So it didn't even take into account something like, is this unit very expensive? Then try to flee. And that makes sense to not even account for it when you only have like 10 units per race or whatever, but I was obviously going to add a lot more units and stuff. Anyway, I say all of this shit because I have experimented with that, and conceptually I have redesigned heroes. I didn't do this in actuality, but from a conceptual standpoint, which is what this question is all about, I had taken them into the concept of champions. I think champions were still going to have inventory slots, but unlike the case where like, units have 2 inventory slots, but they're backpack slots, and you can research the backpack upgrade, champions were going to have either 2 or 4 slots, and all units were going to be able to benefit from the items and use the items. So you could actually have like a footman with like, say, the I forget what the item is now, but there was an item that gave you like level 1 devotion aura, which was the +1 armor aura or whatever, the paladin passive that you could get. And my thinking was, well, I can take my footman and equip him with that, and he can have that item, and then he'll drop it on death, and then my enemy can take it, right? So there's a kind of a risk of like, okay, there's value to creeping, because you'd creep for extra money, and without heroes, you would creep with extra money, and you would creep for the items, and the items would still be useful, and there'd still be that economy of like buying and selling items using units instead of heroes. And then champions would be ones that, if they had items in them, they would be protected like they are for heroes. And when they die, their items would be transferred back to like the altar equivalent or whatever that summoned the champions. And I wasn't really sure if I wanted to make it so that champions were their own units, or if champions were instead a unit that you chose to make a champion, like make into one, which would sort of be like opt-in veterancy almost, where you would specifically say like, hey, toss this unit in the altar, and it would garrison the altar or something, and then there would be a period of time where that altar would convert it into a champion. And so that was the concept that I had. I think that is a better concept because it doesn't involve you grinding for levels and getting more powerful over time through levels, the way that the RPG system was tried to be implemented for Warcraft 3. And instead, it gives you this idea that you, based on merit, based on your executions of like picking up items, of killing enemies, killing neutrals, whatever, and that's how you basically do that, right? So I think that would be better. At least that seems like a more interesting thing to explore, is like the idea of opting into a system where you try to further use those things like the items. Like imagine having a shaman for the orcs, and he has purge, and he has bloodlust, and he has I forget what the third ability is. I know bloodlust is technically the third. Oh, lightning shield was the other one. Well, like, okay, imagine I am cutting down on the amount of spellcasters in the game, because that's something that you would do to make the game healthier anyway. Imagine the abilities that you have are instead there's 2 abilities, or there's 1 ability or something instead of 3. And the way that mana works is different, maybe more like Cosmonarchy's energy regen or something. And then all of that being said, lightning shield is no longer on the shaman. Well, then maybe if you want lightning shield for one reason or another, I kind of think it was like a flawed ability to begin with, and it was only useful because units had so much HP in Warcraft 3, and they didn't have that much HP here. So, lightning shield as an ability would probably be revised. But I know there's a wand of lightning shield item in the game, and so you could imagine a world where you pick that item up, you put it on a shaman, and you use the item to cast the ability. And maybe that was actually how all the abilities were going to be used. Like maybe heal for the priest would actually be an item that you could purchase from your stores or something, and it would basically be the scepter of healing that you would use to enable healing on the priest or something, or maybe not. Maybe that's a step too far, but like that could be an idea to explore as well. And so that would be more of like a customizable army thing, which is not something I'm normally that interested in. But for Warcraft 3, I thought maybe it would be worth exploring. But with Brood War style pacing, it was actually a little bit faster than Brood War when I was first experimenting with it. The combat pacing was a little bit faster than Brood War, which is really funny, but also quite satisfying to see in Warcraft 3, is like seeing the footmen stab a lot faster and die a lot faster, and the orcs stab a lot faster, swing their axes a lot faster and die a lot faster. It was definitely something where I looked at that and I thought, damn, that's way more satisfying immediately than the fucking Warcraft 3 like glacial pace and stuff. So a little bit of background design in my Warcraft 3 stuff, I guess, but and a lot more of like general Warcraft 3 design than I think the question bargained for. But that's what you sometimes get from me. I answer questions in a roundabout way sometimes. But yeah, I would redesign Warcraft 3 Heroes. I would think about making it so that items were usable by all units. And you wouldn't have those consumables like tomes and stuff. Maybe you'd still have like, you definitely still have like potions and whatnot. Like the clarity potion, which for some reason affected everything. It wasn't a clarity scroll. It was specifically a clarity potion. Oh no, I think you could click on it and then cast it onto another unit, and that would basically feed that unit the potion. Or no, that's healing salve. Was clarity potion really something that you could cast on everybody? I can't remember. I think maybe the clarity potion I'm thinking of something else. Something like that would be like, okay, yeah, you've got your scroll of healing, and you can put it on any unit, and that unit can cast it. Right? That's cool. I think that's fine. Obviously, we need a read in a perfect world for like, hey, this unit has that item in its backpack, right? And you'd actually see that visually on the unit. So that would be a challenge from an art department standpoint. And then obviously the champions would have their items slots protected, and they would be withdrawn back to the altar. And maybe the altar could revive champions, or maybe the altar wouldn't be able to do that. I'm not sure. But the champions would basically be like, there would be a champion version of each unit that you could make. And so like the champion footman, it wouldn't be a knight, but it would be like a heavier footman, like a, I don't know what you would call him exactly. But That would be like the idea, right? The champion Tauren would be like a chieftain, right? Stuff like that, right? So, maybe the champion footman would be the paladin as an idea. And then like he's got more powerful abilities and stuff. I don't know. These are concepts that I have that you could easily start to slot in. And so I think that would be better. It would definitely be better for scale. I think it would be ideal if there was no limit on how many champions you could make. Like you could make, 20 champions if you wanted to, and if you had the money to, and the time and stuff. I don't really see a problem with that. Just as true, you could try to avoid the champion system if you wanted to, and just make use of units for picking up and transporting goods, and then be open to the risk of the units dying, right? But this revision preserves creeping as an idea that's valuable, and it preserves sane combat pacing as well. It reclaims that, I guess, and it also reclaims the idea of heroes as a way that doesn't completely... It's more of an opt-in strategy or system, and it doesn't completely control everything. And of course, we removed supply in this experiment as well, in case that wasn't obvious. So there you go. Some changes to Warcraft 3. Now, Lucifirius asks a similar how would I fix or change question, and it's about 4X games like Stellaris. So his question is, what are your misgivings about 4X games, Stellaris, map games, civ types, civilization types, and how would you fix them? And fixes in air quotes here. Well, man, I actually don't have a lot of experience with 4X games all in all. I have played a little bit of Stellaris. The 4X game that I enjoyed the most was Imperium Galactica 2 Alliances. I played that a lot as a kid. As like I guess preteen and maybe early teen or something. I definitely enjoyed it from the perspective of like, it was satisfying to progress through the research tree. I really liked the single player campaign stuff because it was just something I had never experienced a game like that before. And there was some micro, and there was definitely a lot of base building. And I found the base building part really satisfying, like the I guess the city builder part where you'd build up a colony. And I loved like finding ways to increase the civilian cheer while also increasing taxes so I could afford more battle cruisers. That was fun. It's like making sure that like we can really heavily tax the population and do XYZ thing. And there was like also like random events that could happen where you could, I think they were random anyway. It's hard for me to remember, but I remember there was like, oh, hey, the sun has like like a weird thing about it right now that's making it so that the daylight hours are longer. So that's like 20% extra production rate or like efficiency, like work rate or whatever on this planet for like the next year or something. I don't know, whatever. And stuff like that is kind of cool. So I like that. I like that there were so many alien races you could try to play as, although it didn't end up resulting in too much that was actually different. I know some of them were supposed to be better spies. I forget most of the races' names, actually. One of them was the Krahen, that I remember pretty vividly. They were like the brutish bad guys that were all warlike, and they were probably my favorite ones as a result. There were, of course, the humans. There was another one that was like a main race that had like a campaign associated with it, and they were more of like the diplomats and spies and guys. They had the weakest arsenal, the weakest armada, the weakest military. I thought I remember being frustrated by them because I wanted to play. I always wanted to be like solve things by smashing. Maybe pretty predictable, I guess. But also at the very end of my time with that game, I did develop a begrudging appreciation for their method of stuff. So anyway, it's a game that I engaged with a lot back in the day, along with I think it's Free Space or Freelancer or no, it's Freelancer is the wacky game that turns into aliens at the end. If anybody hasn't played it, it's really wacky. Anyway. I liked all that stuff, and it was cool. But Imperium Galactica 2 is like the only 4X game that I've actually played and enjoyed. So the reason why I bring up that game in response to this question is why did I get grabbed by that game, but not by Stellaris, not by Civilizations, not by like any of the civilizations, not by map games, which I guess is like Hearts of Iron and stuff. If I had to suspect, or Crusader Kings, I feel like. For one, I'm definitely more of a sci-fi guy. Like the setting of medieval Europe or World War I/II era Europe or whatever is just not that very interesting to me for one reason or another. I don't even know where I would speculate, how I would speculate that, but it's for whatever reason, that's the truth. And then, going a step further, why did Stellaris not speak to me? And to a lesser extent, I know Planetary Annihilation isn't this kind of game, but it has like a similar idea in some ways. I think it's down to like the chores and how a lot of the things that in Imperium Galactica 2 that I remember, there's like a lot of systems I decided to not opt into. Like the espionage system where you spy on people and you try to sabotage them. They had like basically like, hey, there's a 3% chance this works. And sometimes I'd be like, well, I guess I'll send the guy there. And most of the time I'd be like, no, I want to keep my guy alive. And so I wouldn't do it. And then there was like there's the ship fleet battles. And it's like you can try to control the fleet battles yourself, but the controls are very clunky. And also, why would you do that when you can just win automatically by like creating fleets and having them be really large and well equipped, and then sending them to attack the enemy fleet, which is not very large or well equipped. I don't know. I like the diplomacy part of Imperium Galactica 2. And I always liked to, basically assault and steal worlds and then be like, hey, want to be allies now? And eventually like beat them into submission basically, but like steal their shit, but then like ask for ceasefires after stealing their shit, which I guess is always going to be a historical precedent. Funnily enough, I didn't know that at the time. I was just a kid, but that was my instinct. I was like, hey, I just wanted this planet, and then hey, I just wanted this other planet, and then go on and on and on. I don't think that Imperium Galactica 2 is a very deep game, and I feel like Stellaris and other such games are probably a lot deeper. But the ways that you get access to that depth is by like delving through an ocean of a veneer of like just a lot of stuff that you have to do, a lot of busy work. And the ways that there was busy work in Imperium Galactica 2 that I just ignored. Like I ignored a lot of the espionage system. I ignored a lot of the nuts and bolts of like how the battles were resolved, because I would just resolve them through numbers. Like I would just have a garrison of stuff and orbital platforms and whatnot on all the planets. And then when they invaded, the invasion fleets that they had would either take the planet, which would be very surprising for me, or more often than not, they would die and, be defeated and that sort of thing. Right. And, the stuff that more spoke to me was like the dynamic events across the cosmos that you controlled. Like there'd be trader ships and there would be pirate ships. And it's like, hey, you can board the trader vessels if you want to steal their shit, but you could also protect them and then you'll get some money. And you can, defeat the pirates or you'll be prone to being attacked by and victimized by the pirates and stuff like that. So that was more interesting to me. Those kinds of interactions were more interesting to me. And like how you strategize resolving them than like trying to have a poor man's like tactical battle or whatever when the planetary attack was happening or the fleet attack was happening, fleet battle. So I would just have those auto resolve and just do my best to make it so that they always auto resolved in my victory. But you can't really auto resolve a lot of the, for lack of a better term, like TISM simulator stuff that happens in modern 4X games. Especially I've noticed this with like Stellaris in particular, where there was like a lot of things that they would constantly bombard you with notifications about on your first run. And some of it might have been tutorialization, but some of it felt like it wasn't. And it was just like, I don't know, it was like 30 minutes into my run or less. And I was informed that there was like a breakthrough of discovering a black hole somewhere and we should investigate it and send a team there. And then I did. And then like, I think they died immediately or something. And I was just like, was this just a bait? Was it like, oh, you shouldn't have done that. You're a dumbass. Why did you allow that? Why did you accept that? And then like my people were getting really angry and stuff. And I mean, I didn't really try to get into the game, admittedly, but I just remember getting this very real sense of like, I am being bogged down and overwhelmed. But as I say this and try to recall my memories of it, all I remember is really that it was just not, at the end of the day, it actually wasn't very involved. And I should probably actually plan a stream or something where I go through Stellaris and I come up with like more concrete reasons or ideas to fix it. But without really knowing all the ins and outs, I would say, basically, I tailored my experience in Imperium Galactica 2 to focus on the things that I was personally interested in at the time as a kid, which was like the infrastructure side of setting up and like the base building, the city building, right? And the research, some diplomacy, very minimal amounts of espionage, which I guess you could factor into diplomacy and just imagine that that's part of it. So there'd be that aspect, right? And then beyond that, I was like, it was really very much centered around the exploration side. It was centered around responding to dynamic events. And it was also centered around like whatever the main story narratives were, like finding, there was like some tiers I think you were supposed to find as the craw hen or something like that. I can't really remember. And then I know that you were like, you were basically a Jesus figure or something in the human campaign. And I cannot remember. It wasn't Solarian because that's from Mass Effect, but anyway, whatever the species was from the third species, I can't remember their campaign either. But I think their idea was that they should try to like unite all the races by allying with them or something. That's a vague idea. Maybe that's not even true. But anyway, that is a thing that I remember thinking about as like, what can we do to like, that's my ultimate goal. So I have an ultimate goal, first of all. I don't remember that there was one in Stellaris. It didn't seem like it was communicated to me properly. So I had an ultimate goal to work towards. And then along the way to that ultimate goal, I had a bunch of other things that I could engage with, many of which were dynamic events that were happening as a result of other bodies in the system behaving in their own interests, or at least that's what it seemed like as a kid. I'm definitely, by the way, like overinflating how good Imperium Galactica 2 was in my memory, and I will acknowledge that. If I played it now, it would not hold up, I'm sure. And then I ignored some of the stuff that just seemed like annoying busy work to me, and that wasn't interesting to me. And then I focused on the stuff that was like, how do I maintain my populace at home without it being really grindy and boring and stupid? How do I, like, I'm actually building stuff, and then that, like, the good city layouts and that have like stadiums and medical facilities and food kitchens and shit like that. Sort of like, to a lesser extent, I've played Frostpunk kind of recently. I guess that's not really a 4X game. I don't know what you would call that, if not a 4X game. And it's like, there's a little bit of like town management like that, where you're trying to manage people's resources and happiness or whatever, contentedness. And so I liked managing the contentedness part, and also at the same time managing like the military side. And then also at the same time, doing a little bit of fleet management where I would assemble the fleets and then send them off on there'd be a scout fleet to just discover planets. There'd be invasion fleets to take over planets, colonization fleets that would just colonize planets if they were like uninhabited at that time. There would be terraforming and colonization. And I liked all that stuff. So that's the stuff that I focused on. And then there's also diplomacy and some espionage. And that was basically it. And the 4X figure that I would imagine would be like, let's try to do that. But in Stellaris, I felt like I was getting bogged down a lot. But maybe, like I said, I should probably just make a stream where I just play that for like 3-4 hours or whatever and just actually try to play it instead of just like dismissing it after 30 minutes or less. So there you go. That's it's not really a concrete answer, but I just told you basically what I liked about Imperium Galactica 2 and what I would try to focus on. And so I will see if I can do that when I play Stellaris next. And maybe, if nothing else, I'll have a bit more concrete answer to this question after playing it. So there you go, Lucy. Hopefully that was informative in some way. Let's talk about Three Crow's question. Three Crow asks, what are your opinions on community salt? What's your advice for people who are seeking a stoic mindset and personal discipline to not only avoid salt, but to embrace a mindset that leads to self-improvement? Well, this is a tough question. This was asked after Shambler and Newt were raging about stuff, and then eventually, it came up kind of again when Hepsea was raging about some stuff. And like it's always an evergreen topic, I feel like, as we get more people who are playing and they type a lot, and that's the way that it goes. Some people simply blow steam off that way. It turns out that Newt was getting pretty angry about stuff because he had his own personal life troubles, and maybe that's also the case for Hepsea and Shambler. I don't know. Maybe that's just how they do things. I would say I am pretty good at generally speaking, not getting sucked into that. There are some things that will trigger me that I'm trying to identify and not react negatively about. But it can be difficult in the moment. And I also think that the last 2 weeks I wasn't myself as much of myself as I normally am because I was splitting so much time with the Counter-Strike casting and stuff. So I would try to encourage whoever is experiencing significant negative emotion about a particular thing related to a video game or a competition or whatever, as like it very well could be the case that something is busted, imbalanced, unfair, etc. The best thing you can probably do is write that out somewhere in like a notepad file or on your phone as like a thought, as a proposition, as a postulation, and literally sleep on it. Like, come back to it later. Because there's not really any rush. We'll be around to work on it forever. You know, not forever, ever, but like we're going to be around the whole rest of this year working on Cosmonarchy at the very least. It's not like you have to absolutely get this in now or otherwise it's not going to be considered. And it's not like you shouldn't put it through. But maybe by sleeping on it and taking time to think about whether it's true and just waiting before you share your perspective on the matter, especially considering maybe you just lost a match or whatever, it got you angry. That will, for one, give time to simmer down so that if there is emotional charge to it, it's more in the driver's seat. For another, it will allow you to have a more clearer head about it later on, not just because of whatever emotions you're going through in that moment, but also because of whatever other stressors are happening in your life. Delaying it a little bit adds some element of like delayed, not gratification, but like, I guess it is technically called delayed gratification, but it's like, if you can delay the impulse of just typing something immediately or saying something immediately, then you go through this process where you evaluate if it's even really that important. Like Hapsea did a lot of typing about how Zerg macro is super easy and said some very pejorative things about it and said like, yeah, it's basically like, it's obviously overpowered. And I engaged with him a little bit. And then he, like shortly thereafter, he played and beat the Zerg player that was owning him by trying something that he came up with as a response to losing versus that Zerg player. And it's like, oh, well, maybe that doesn't do anything to his theory. Maybe it was a low percentage win. Maybe it was like something that he doesn't want to see as like the main, stylistically, as like the main way to win, right? Like maybe he thinks that's a perverted way to win or a perverted way to have to play, where that's the only option. And all this stuff, but like, that doesn't mean it is the only option. And that does like, it's maybe his first time fighting that style of Zerg or something. Right. So anyway, I feel like it's worth pointing all this out because from my perspective, I feel like it's good to have a world where you delay your gut reaction even to yourself. But maybe you write it out to yourself privately so that you know what your gut reaction is. And then you compare it in 24 hours or 12 hours or whatever, or even just 1 hour. Just like sit and think about it for that long while you're doing something else. I feel like that can be very helpful for that. I feel like my opinions about community salt would be like, that's the advice portion, or what I try to do now as well is like, and for me, it's not related to the game balance. It's more like if somebody's behaving in a way that I would, for shorthand purposes, call them being an asshole, rather than responding immediately, I will take at least like 5 minutes to like, okay, they pissed me off a bit with this comment, or they, made me feel a certain way negatively about this due to this comment. Well, I'm not going to react immediately because maybe I'll say something that's just going to fan the fire, so to speak. So there you go. That's my advice, is just delay it a little bit. That's what I've been doing when people express community salt. I think community salt is unavoidable, but it does have some corrosive consequences where I know for a fact that when people like Shambler, Newt, and Hapsea type angrily or say angry things on their stream or whatever, it brings the mood down of people and it makes them less excited about the project or the less excited about the prospect of playing with them. And these are what people have told me privately and what people say publicly as well. It's just in different channels or at a later date. And so it is obvious to me that when people engage in this behavior, it is actually bad for the community, in a sense of like, if that was all the community was known for and it was a significant part of what the community was known for, and thankfully right now it isn't, we would have the end result be that many people would disengage and no longer be interested in contributing. And I can guarantee you that there have been cases where people's reactions to stuff has probably led them to, led other people to see that and then disengage or leave the server entirely or whatever. That has just happened. I can just tell you that from from a law of probabilities standpoint. So I know it's not good, and maybe that could be another thing that I could say to people who engage in that behavior is like, okay, listen, for your own benefit, so that you're not, raging out and having an event or whatever you want to call it. Not to sound like I'm talking down to those kinds of people or whatever, but just to say, like, literally for your benefit, it would be good to wait on it and simmer on it and think about, muse on it and think about what the answer is. And then, but also for the community, right? Like you raging has a negative impact on everybody who's watching. A lot of people just read and they don't engage anyway, but they definitely won't be interested in engaging if that's how you carry yourself. And if that's what they mostly see, like maybe they only check in every once in a while. And if that's what they see, that's their one opportunity to see to get a snapshot of what the community is like. And, it's not a necessarily reasonable standard to always behave zen or whatever. And that's not even what I'm asking for, but hopefully this part of the answer was coherent. I don't think it's good, but I also don't think it's avoidable. I think the best we can do is build the game in such a way that, and approach community salt in such a way that we make it clear that you lower the difficulty of the game by becoming better. And that includes in PvP. And I also think that Dead Infested has seemingly improved his perspective and his mindset, where he doesn't rage out about losing or being on a loss streak or whatever. And he seems to have realized that actually that was pretty negative, and him constantly rage quitting was not cool. And that's good. That's great. Because I think the fact that he also surprised me when he said that he uninstalled Starcraft 1 and he's Cosmonarchy only. I was like, oh, well, that's fucking wild. I can't believe that. But they're just like what happened with 3Crow and the Beaver, where they really improved, Benno as well. You can throw that down and say listen, dude, there's no reason Dead Infested can't improve too. And I feel like the community salt part of this, the salt in general, the negative reaction, oftentimes, not only does it have the negative emotional or reactive consequences that we talked about from both the individual being angry and the people who are reading that anger or engaging with that anger in one way or another by, metabolizing it. It also has a negative reaction or negative end result where by being angry at a thing, and not approaching it from the perspective of, some element of rationality for, not to use a cliche, I feel like what will end up happening is they will not arrive at a positive conclusion, and certainly not something that is even a thought process, like a hypothesis that they can then test that may improve them. Like Hapsea went through this procedure of saying that Zerg is baby and kindergarten or whatever, and then after going through that whole procedure, he eventually figured out a strategy and then tried it immediately after that and won. And it's like, oh, well, I feel like you could have maybe gotten to that faster for whatever, which would have been a benefit to you and also a benefit to the community and also a benefit to your emotional state, not just your win rate or whatever. You could have gotten to that end result faster without the complaints, without the salt, without the anger. So that's another piece of here's how I can help you to not be salty. Anyway, hopefully that made some sense. And thanks for the question as always. We're going to come into the final question before the show outro, and it's another wacky writing prompt from the Shambler. He asks, humans evolve alongside sentient bird, fish, eel, or snake people, or I guess he says and snake people, on a world without magic. What time period and level of technology would you choose to tell a story featuring all of these races, and what would be the primary focus of that story? The races can communicate with one another in some manner. It can be as difficult or convoluted as you desire. You can choose a sci-fi setting, but it must be hard sci-fi if you do. I don't like hard sci-fi, so I find it actually to just totally miss the point of what fiction is supposed to be about, by the way, so as a general note. I'm sure there's probably some hard sci-fi out there that is tolerable to my tastes, but it's it's sort of like the people who say, why are you painting a picture? Why are you painting a painting, I guess, that's like this picture? Just take the picture. It's like that. It's maybe there's a reason. Maybe maybe it's not like the picture, even though it's photorealistic in a way, or whatever. If that doesn't click for people, then I'm not really sure how I would explain it. But that's my gut reaction to hard sci-fi. Anyway, that's a total aside. So we have to have sentient birds. We have to have sentient fish and eels. Fish/eels. We have to have sentient snake people. Okay, so all of these have to be like people, by the way. So the concept would be like, I know there's like the cat people in Elder Scrolls. Basically, we need a bird people, we need an aquatic people, and we need a snake people. And the aquatic people have to be like fish, eel, or whatever. But does people mean that they're bipedal, I wonder? Because like I would like I guess snakes probably aren't bipedal, are they? I mean, there's naga, which aren't bipedal, but they're like just serpentine, creatures or whatever. And then there's like, I don't remember the name of it, but in D&D there's like a Forgotten Realms style stuff where there's like bipedal lizard folk or whatever. Okay, so I guess the birds, the avians, would be the ones that would be bipedal. The fish and eels would be more monstrous or whatever, and would be they probably wouldn't have limbs, or if they did, they would be mostly limiting themselves to yeah, I wonder about that. Okay, I'm starting to come up with some ideas. The snake people would be... Okay, so humans would definitely be at war with the snake people. There is no collaboration with snakes in general for humans, because humans have evolved to really, really fear on a primal level snakes. Obviously, there'd be some, I guess, deviance or whatever you want to call it, where there would be some people who would have maladaptive affinity for snakes and vice versa for the snakes versus the humans. But they would be peoples who would have war going back since the dawn of time. The birds, I feel like, would probably be... they would literally be above that kind of behavior from a literal sense. There's a dad joke in there. And they'd probably tend to be like shorter, so that they could, their bones would be more brittle, right? So they can fly and stuff. We would keep flight on them, even though they would be bird people or whatever. So they would be capable of flight, but they would be more like, I guess they'd probably be like maximum. They would be like half the size of like a pterodactyl, which is, by the way, taller than a human most of the time, I think, from what I understand. Maybe that's a different pteron, and pterodactyl is smaller. I don't remember. But I don't know that much about dinos at the end of the day anyway. And the fish and eel people would probably be like the lowest class, I guess, from a mental evolution standpoint, because the only way that they could have their evolution jump started in the first place is if they, without fire, you can't industrialize. So the land creatures would have had to provide, that sort of thing. So in this case, I don't know, like humans might actually be ape people, right? If we're going to go with like the animal thing, I think they would be ape people. I don't really know what else they would be. The mammals of the bunch. The birds, I think, would be... So we are asked what period/level of technology would we choose, and what would be the primary focus of the story. So, so I think we would probably do something like, maybe like the feudal medieval age, thinking like feudal Japan, definitely something like the Middle Ages. I'm not a historian, so I'm probably going to conflate a lot of these or use the wrong terms, but I'm thinking like we have medieval level tech. We have, it's at least been the Renaissance though, hasn't it? So it's past the Middle Ages. So let's talk about I think was the Renaissance as recently as I'm thinking 14th to the 17th century. Yeah. Okay. That's what I was thinking it was. I was thinking like 1600, which is like the tail end of it, I guess. So yeah, we could say like the 1400s, 1500s era. And the reason I would do that is because the Renaissance has like a lot of opportunity for technology to develop. I'm thinking like Da Vinci and shit. And in a world where there's a lot of other So I guess we haven't hit industrial age yet, but like fire is still an important detail. The reason why I'm bringing all this stuff up is because we would want, when we are proposed a threat that is outside of our tribe, we tend to innovate a lot more. And that's like how war has been really innovative for us, like a source of a lot of innovations for humans. And I think it's a lot easier to imagine that we'll have a lot of crazy tech and a lot more of like specialized tech for like fighting snakes compared to fighting humans. So I don't think you would see gunpowder show up as like a thing. Without hands, you can't really create technology, though. So I guess maybe the snakes will have to have some element of that. I don't know. Because it's a world without magic, so we can't just have it so that they can like use telekinesis or something. I mean, maybe that would technically be sci-fi, but I would have to explain it as per the hard sci-fi rule. I'd have to have like a mechanism by which it would naturally evolve. So I guess the snake people need to have arms so that they can hold weaponry, fashion objects, etc. So that's where it comes into more like Naga. Well, the Warcraft 3 Naga anyway. I think the Naga in folklore is more like actual serpents with no arms. So we've established that this is going to be like Renaissance era tech. We're going to have a little bit of like steampunkish vibes, I guess, but it's not like full on steampunk, right? It's just like the shit that steampunk people tend to use, like the gears and all that stuff. A lot of like really old school, old world analog devices. And I'm thinking, yeah, we're going to evolve to use that stuff on our side, the humans, right? We're going to have plenty of tech like that. And it's going to be specialized for like doing business with the birds. And some Samaritan humans would probably have been convinced by the birds to offer technology and training up to the fish people, which would elevate them from the depths of the ocean where they've basically been, they can think. Their communication is definitely rough. By the way, birds have vocal cords that can make human sound, so there would be some limited speech possible between them, but mostly I think you'd see writing as the primary mode of communication. For the fish people, there's not really any way to do that properly. They could be taught language, and they could at least be taught to read, and I suppose you could probably write if they had not fins, but they had actual arms and hands. And they would probably need that if they were going to involve like any sort of military action, because again, it goes back to like what I talked about with the snake people. So I guess we have to give them all hands. So we'll say the primary focus would be mankind battling evil, including an inner evil, trying to in that process trying to find themselves and what sets themselves apart. Despite the philosophizing of the avians that don't really have to go to, they don't have to be, they're not really at risk from the humans or from the snakes, and definitely not from the fish. So they don't really have any stake in the fight, but they're still constantly philosophizing, and that will certainly distract the humans from what they're like finding some kind of true goal or whatever, and true conception of themselves. And then, how does their treatment of the fish people, where they've, maybe used them as food a lot, and certainly haven't thought of them as sentient people, as a group of people, how is that handled, and how is their war with the snakes handled, and what does that mean for them and stuff like that. So I guess that would be the primary focus. The technological stuff, I just feel like it would be interesting to try to tell a story with those constraints. And since I can't do sci-fi and I can't do magic, then I figure I might as well do something that's like the most interesting period of technological time. Although I wouldn't want to live during then, because let's just say people didn't care too much about whether or not you lived or died. And that brings us to the end of the show, ladies and gentlemen. I am happy to have brought you another episode of Prototype. We are indeed going to be back next week, where we'll probably and / hopefully be halfway through the Throne Room stage, or at the very least we'll be scheduling the second round of the Throne Room stage for Acropolis number 1. We'll have made more progress on the Zerg tutorial and some audiovisual updates. And of course, we will have continued to do some mapping and maybe even implemented a new unit or two into Cosmonarchy. So stay tuned for more developments. And of course, we will see you guys later on after all is said and done. GG.